Welcome to the JEMS Report, brought to you by Clarion Events Fire and Rescue Group and the Journal of Emergency Medical Services. I'm Ted Lee, Editor-in-Chief of JEMS, and along with Jeff Frankel, our Managing Editor, we are bringing you hot topics, relevant news, and guests that are writing and doing podcasts and webinars for us at JEMS. Today, it's my great pleasure to introduce Captain Rommie Duckworth, who has written our latest article on debriefing tips for EMS professionals. So thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Ted. It's wonderful to be here. It's stuff I love talking about, and I love being part of JEMS.
Great. Well, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background and why debriefing tends to be such a hot topic and kind of a passion for you.
Sure. I've been, pardon me, I originally went to school for chemical engineering and found it was kind of a thing that I wasn't as interested in. But there was one college course that I took on first aid that I really sparked kind of a fire for me. And I didn't know any firefighters or EMTs or anything like that. But that one first aid course kind of led me to become an EMT and a volunteer firefighter and a paramedic and a career firefighter. And the more I learned about all of this kind of stuff, the more I enjoyed sharing what I knew and learning from others. And in addition to sort of the clinical EMS stuff, I became really interested in how to really learn and really communicate well, so that, I've been doing this the 30-something years now. And every time I go out, every day I go to work, every call I go on, I want to learn as much as I can. And I wanted to be able to share that with other people and help them learn. So that's what drew me down this road of experiential learning and this learning theory stuff. And the funny thing is, a lot of it was dry and academic, but the more I dug into it, the more I got these sort of learning nuggets and teaching nuggets of, wow, this is all real stuff that can help me be a better learner every day and me be a better teacher every day. Because we all know tons of people who have lots of experience, but they don't seem to be, I hate to say it this way, learning from that experience. They sort of go through a lot of bits of life and they don't seem to pick up a whole lot. So, what can we do about that? And that's where this article came from.
Right. Well, you mentioned a couple things about like real life experience versus academic experience. So, can you elaborate a little bit on, how this might impact either or is there a difference between the two, and kind of how best to bring out these learning nuggets, like you mentioned, for the individual to actually be able to apply them as they go?
Sure. Well, I learned from doing a lot of reading as well as, getting out there and as I say, my passion and my interest is really like, where does the book stuff meet the road stuff and how do they align, like you're asking? So I read a lot of, sort of a fundamental education theory, and some of it I find really, really accessible. Back in the early to mid part of the 20th century, there's a guy named John Dewey who wrote a book that's, if it's not right next to me, all right, it's not immediately right next to me, it's a little bit further away, but it's called Experience and Education. And it's almost like a pamphlet, but it's all about exactly this. And I would recommend it to any educator, EMS or otherwise. And his thing was telling isn't teaching. And he wasn't the first to come up with this, but he said, so much of what we do is about knowledge transfer, about a teacher giving the bits of information, sort of reading off a screen or reading out of a book to a student. They absorb the information, they have learned, now they can do a thing. And he said it needs to be about knowledge, not about knowledge transfer, but about knowledge application. What can they do with this? So here's a guy writing almost 100 years ago about really teaching kids for the most part. And it resonates with me as an EMS educator. Like, yeah, it needs to be about everything I do when I'm teaching needs to be about knowledge application. So even when I'm talking about, that really fundamental stuff like anatomy and physiology, I want to season it, a little salt and pepper in there about what we're going to be doing with this. Yes, you need to memorize some parts of anatomy and physiology, but the way you get it to really lock in for people, as opposed to memorize and regurgitate, is here's how we're going to use these, how the lungs work and how bits of the heart work. So that's where I see some of this academic stuff, like John Dewey's and many, many people since him, help us really focus on day to day. Like I say, it's sort of professional development as well as helping others.
Yeah. Well, that's always kind of a rub, and I'm coming from EMS academia as well, where people talk about, the foundational education versus the practical application, and there's always this kind of push-pull between what they're learning in the classroom versus what they're trying to apply out into the field. And you see students struggle sometimes with they're very intelligent and they understand the information, and they're good at math and they're good at English and they're good in their sciences. But when they try to move it towards their hands for the practical application of it, that's where some struggle. Some can pick it up and they're very technical, but they struggle with the academic part versus the technical aspect. So that's always that makes it interesting. So how does debriefing help with kind of this transition from this foundational work to the practical application work?
Well, one of the big things I learned about debriefing for the longest time, I think I was first introduced to ideas in debriefing when I was running classes and we were running simulations from sort of, throw a regular CPR mannequin on the floor to some high fidelity CPR mannequins that can, burp and bleed and do all the stuff, right? And I really thought about debriefing in that way. And then I realized, boy, you can really use this for anything though. You come back from a call and the way for you to think about a call, or there was any significant event in or out of the classroom. So we look at it as the focus of debriefing is that where does the learning occur? It asks that question. And the learning does not occur in the experience. So, we tend to think of, and I did for years and years and years, like, well, you put them, you have somebody in an experience, whether it's a simulation, whether they're, you just give them a tabletop scenario, or they're doing a clinical rotation, or they're, a big event occurred in real world, real life. We did a big call. And you think the experience is when they learn, but it isn't. In the experience, people are just reacting for the most part to the stuff that goes on around them. They're not locking it in as the lessons learned from this to apply to other things that are maybe a little bit different. So I, based on other academic learning, the way I wrap my head around it, this David Kolb's model of experiential learning, and there's all sorts of research on that. But I broke it down into 4 R's, and that's what's in the article: react, reflect, rules, and repeat. React is the experience, whether it was one that you gave somebody or one that just like, hey man, this is a big event and I want to make sure that we learn from this. And that's the react. Again, the word react reminding us that in the event, people are mostly just dealing with whatever it is. They're trying to get through the simulation. They're trying to get through the call. They're trying to save the patient, whatever it happens to be. They're reacting for the most part. Reflect, man, that's where the real learning begins, where we need to reflect on it. And there's a method specifically that we use to reflect so we get the most lessons. We call that plus delta. There's a ton of debriefing techniques. You can use any one that you prefer, but that's in the reflect step where we tease out the stuff that we should be learning. Then we go to rules. Okay, so we talked about a lot of stuff. People sort of, talked about how they felt about this call or this scenario. And the rules are like, let's get to the bottom line. Here are the rules. Bing, bang, boom. When we get a pediatric patient and we're hearing that they're supposed to, they're supposed to be having difficulty breathing, we are specifically looking for nasal flaring. We are lifting up their shirt so that we could see those intercostal retractions, because even though they may be moving air, that means they're struggling to move air. That's a big rule from a big call. And then we move to the final R, repeat. So how do we take these rules, and we know we're going to have other calls? maybe exactly like this, maybe not quite exactly like this. How are we going to take these rules and apply them when we repeat this whole scenario? So those are the 4 R's, and that's how I wrap my head around how debriefing can help us.
Right. Well, with this debriefing, and you mentioned, real life scenario or situations versus scenarios. Can this be informal? Is it better if it's formal? With your 4 R's, is there, a time frame? Because I remember coming up, especially with simulation, where we were talking about for like every 1 minute that somebody would spend in simulation, there would be like 10 minutes of debriefing that were needed just so that they could actually walk through and understand kind of what they reacted to, like you pointed out. In the moment, a lot of times it's muscle memory. It's things that they don't really understand what they're doing. They're just reacting to it and trying to change that reaction.
Yeah, that's really important. Now, it's a good guideline if you're doing a simulation. And again, whether it's a low fidelity simulation or just giving somebody a scenario, informally, like, hey, if this happened, tell me what you would do. Right up to a full, fake ambulance with real monitors and high fidelity, $100,000 simulator, any of them. Because it gives us an idea that, like, look, don't schedule this as we're going to give them a simulation that's going to take an hour for them to go through, and then we're going to go 10 minutes of talking about it afterwards, and that's where learning occurred. And
Right.
And if you think about it, like you say, with that react and then the reflect part, reflect, rules, and repeat, it takes a while to do that. Now, that being said, if you're talking about, say, a real call, if they took them, I don't know, the real call was, an hour and a half or 3 hours, it doesn't mean it's going to take 9 hours to go over all of this stuff. The guideline is really just to remind us that the react part, it should be sort of the smaller part of it. You have to give time for these other sections, and as you say, it can be informal. Sometimes, I'll go over a very simple call. Just the other day with my crew, and we're a combined fire EMS service, transport paramedic service, and we went out on. It was just a medical alarm, just a pendant alarm, and it was kind of crazy and confusing, and it was a refusal. Wasn't even, the person wasn't even injured, but I thought, what, the communication went really, really well. So it wasn't just a wag your finger, we're going to sit down for a debriefing because someone screwed up. It was, hey, I want to take the elements of, like, how well you did communicating with different units, looking for this patient and trying to gather information, and we put the picture together very quickly. So I want to make sure that not only do I say, like, hey, good job, but that we pick out the rules and we go, man, let's use this kind of communication for when we have a really bad, a really complicated call, because that's what's going to guide us through. So it's not always just somebody did something wrong, or we're going to make this big simulation. It can be, as you say, very simple and informal, but I keep those 4 R's in my mind. I don't say them out loud to the people, but okay, how are we going to form it? Like, oh, okay, they reacted, so they weren't thinking about it. Let's reflect on it and talk about it a little bit with our plus delta there. Let's make sure that I land with the rules that were taken away and how we can apply it when we repeat a call like this.
Yeah. So one thing, and we've talked a little bit about this with, the classic education student type thing, and then the actual provider. When students get used to having this type of environment where they run calls or they run experiences and they have these debriefings, how does that help with the providers? Because, like you mentioned, not having this being punitive, or, we didn't do anything wrong, nobody's in trouble. How do we continue this into the working profession where they see value in this, and that, as leaders, we continue to provide support and educational opportunities for our crews?
I think one thing is, if it's going to be, so first of all, I think it's very important to do exactly that this isn't just for the learning environment, it's for ongoing professional development. And that we say, we want to develop lifelong learners. I hear this all the time, but I see often not a whole lot of effort put into that.
Right.
For me, this is a way to do that. And number one, when people are first encountering this kind of informal, now it can be formal. People with military experience may know that this is also used formally, and in some fire departments after or big incident after action reports, this is that this follows very much with different labels maybe, but it follows very much this format. So it can be used formally, but I think introducing it informally first freaks people out. They're not used to it. They why are we getting called in to talk about this call? That who screwed up? Who's going to get, somebody's going to get blamed, and they're waiting the whole time, right? So I found through trial and error, if it's going to be informal, let's keep it informal. And one of the big parts of informal is it's got to be quick. So it doesn't mean we rush through it, but for me, for myself, and for the people who are involved, I want people to get a chance to speak, make sure they know I'm listening. I asked you a question because I want to hear, right? But know when to shut up. But especially me, I'm getting excited about like, oh, there's all these things that I want stuff from my experience. I want to share about this, but I got to know when to shut up. So we're going to do it informally. And again, you still follow those 4 R's. I'm keeping it in my mind. But when it comes to rules, pick out the couple of rules from this event. And then, hey, we're done. Move on. Keep it light. We'll go with that, move on with our day. And I find that people really, once they realize this is not something punitive, no one's getting in trouble, or even if things didn't go as well as we wanted, this is not me looking to yell at somebody. They really like it for those lessons learned, and they see it as professional development. As long as we keep it relatively light and definitely short, but focused.
Right. Well, to your point with focus too, I know, as an educator, a lot of times, people are trying to cover so much stuff, and then you turn a debriefing into just another wash where the individual is just, blasted with so much information. Like, I'm not learning anything, instead of picking out, key elements of this is the takeaway from this. Give them actionable items where they have a couple things that they either can work on or that they know that they did really well, and to really launch into the next one a little bit more prepared.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's key. As we said in the beginning, it's about knowledge application. People want bits that are going to make them better in doing things, not just to know. So I try hard to keep that in mind when we're trying to pull out those rules, that I explicitly say, not just, you should do this or you should know this. Now you know this. Now go and do better. This is how you can use this. Or honestly, again, I try to know when I need to shut up. Hey, if this is a rule that worked out, how can we use this on the next call? And have them think about it. Again, the focus isn't me. If the focus is supposed to be them getting better, then they need to roll this stuff around in their heads. And maybe I facilitate it. I'll throw out a little bit of, well, what if, it was a really bad pediatric call, and,
Right.
How quickly, or, hey, remember, this isn't just the paramedic thing, that EMTs can do this too, because paramedics can also miss out on stuff, and not because they're bad paramedics, because they get overwhelmed with stuff. And, maybe throw a little bit of things out there, how we can use it, but really focus on them saying, well, here's how I can take this away. And man, then they really come away with, oh, I came up with stuff from this little quick sit down, and they get really excited about it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that always helps too. I mean, it helps reinforce, their own learning and their own capabilities. And then, of course, ultimately, they have the confidence to move on because, we're not always going to be there for them. The educators aren't always going to be there for them. And, I used to say this, I'm not going to be there at 3 o'clock in the morning when you need to make this decision on your own, or when you're in charge. So I think it helps, give them the confidence to move forward, with this. So I think this is great. Like I said, I have an academic background, and these debriefings and interactions I think have always been very valuable for us. So I wanted to thank you again for the article. We have a webinar with you this month as well on this topic. Any last tidbits little things you want to put out before the webinar, now's your time. And
I would say, take a look at the article. We're going to be able to expand on some of the stuff that we said in the article because we didn't want to put everything in there. And as you say, I wanted to make even the article so that people could tease out sort of those key elements. But in the webinar, we'll be able to dive into how give some more examples of how we can use this so people can see how this can be applied on a regular basis to really make their work better, make their professional development better, but really to be a force multiplier. Because once people start getting these good takeaways and feeling good about it, as you say, when you're not there, they're going to be sharing this good stuff when you're not even in the room. And that's how we make your service better. It's how we make the profession better.
Yes, and to your point, that's how we transfer education and experience. The 20 plus years that I have, the 30 years that you have, everybody that's coming through. How do we give this to the next generation? Because we won't be here all the time, and we will be passing the baton, on to the next group that will be running EMS for the future. So, again, I wanted to thank you for your time. It was wonderful talking to you, and we look forward to more articles and the webinar coming up for sure. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.